Sam with Big Dog Adhesives. I want to take a couple minutes today and go over a best practice that'll help you guys take your fabrication game up to the next level. And that has to do with if you've ever seen a gray line in your seam when you're done, or kind of a shadow line in there. I want to explain what causes that and what you guys can do to help prevent that. So we've had a few calls come in where they're like, hey, we just finished mitering this porcelain. Everything looked good. We put the adhesive in there. We polished the edge, and now we're seeing a line. And what is going on? Or a solid surface. Hey, we got this Cove backsplash. It's tight. We see a little bit of a line. It's tight. We see a little bit of a line. What is causing that? And if you look close, it kind of looks like a gray line, or almost like the adhesive has turned gray. The reality is it's not that the adhesive is changing color. It's that the adhesive is more translucent than the stone, and the light is passing into that seam, into the adhesive, bouncing around off the opaque stone and creating a shadow in there. It seems like if the light was going there, it would light it up and make it like clear or a bright light, but what it actually does is it comes in, it kind of refracts off, and it creates a shadow in there. So if you're working on particularly a white piece of material, it kind of looks like a gray shadow line. So first thing I want to go over is when you are mixing adhesives, or you're selecting adhesive or mixing it yourself, either way, whether you're going to get it from a cartridge like this, or if you're going to use more of a knife grade and mix the pigment yourself, there's two things you need to take into consideration. One is the color. Obviously, you know the color of the material you're working with, and you want to make sure that the adhesive you choose is as close to that color as possible so you get a nice blend. The other thing you need to be thinking about is the opacity of the stone, or the translucency of the material that you're working with. And now, what does that mean? What does it mean? You know, I think a lot of people look at the stones and they just think they're all the same, but I want to show you guys this. So if you look at this piece of quartz, it is a very opaque piece of quartz, meaning no light is passing through it, right? And all stones have different levels of translucency, which is the amount of light that can pass through it, or the amount of opaqueness to it, which is the resistance to transferring light. So if I turn on this flashlight, I come behind the stone, you don't see any light coming through this quartz. It's a very heavily pigmented quartz, so no light is passing through. Now, I don't have another piece of quartz here, but there are several quartz on the market that are translucent. So here's a piece of solid surface. It's a dark cobalt blue, looks very dark, but then when you turn your flashlight on and you come behind it, the light passes right through it. So this is extremely important when you guys are picking your adhesive, is to know, hey, how opaque or how translucent is the material that I'm working with? And there's two reasons for this. One, if you're working with a very heavily pigmented quartz, or a very dense granite, or a very heavily pigmented solid surface material, you want to make sure that you're using an adhesive that is heavily pigmented as well. If your material is heavily pigmented and you have a translucent adhesive that goes in there, the light won't pass through the material, but it will pass through your seam, and that's where you're going to get that shadow line. So you want to make sure that the pigment level of the adhesive matches the pigment level of the quartz. Now, the exact opposite is true. If you are working with a translucent piece of stone that is going to be lit and the light is passing through it, you want to use a more translucent adhesive. Now, the reason for that is if you have a translucent piece of material and the light is passing through it, and you have a very opaque adhesive in there, the light is going to pass through the material, not pass through the actual seam with the adhesive in it, and you're going to have a black line in there because the seam adhesive is going to be stopping the transmission of the light. So your goal is to try and get an adhesive that has somewhat of the same translucency or opaqueness as the material, so light is transferring through the material and the seam at the same time. That will eliminate any dark lines or shadow lines there. Now, if you're getting a cartridge and you're using a cartridge adhesive, most of the matches are done for you. So if you're working with the major quartz manufacturers or solid surface manufacturers, you can pretty much look up the color of the adhesive and get a match. I would say if you look it up, it's like 99% of the time right. Of course, you want to look at it, do a test piece, see how it works. The exact color of the material, like you said, is dye lots. They might shift a little bit. The adhesive color could shift slightly from here and there. So depending on the color and that run, it might be slightly varying, but I would say 99.9% of the time, the cartridge is going to be dead right every single time. Now, if you are using a knife grade adhesive and you are mixing your own pigment in, you really need to be conscious of this translucency opaqueness issue, because you could squeeze out your adhesive, you could put in one drop of color, mix it all up, and you're like, hey, this is perfect. My adhesive is the exact color. But if you only got 1 drop of pigment in there and you have a highly pigmented slab, you don't have enough of a pigment load in your adhesive to match the opaqueness of the quartz, right? So you're going to be putting a very translucent adhesive into your seam, and it's not going to be having nearly enough pigment in it to stop the light. So, maybe you need to put in an extra drop of pigment or a couple of drops to make the pigment load in that adhesive much more dense, so that it's going to stop the transmission of the light and not create that shadow line. Now, I've got this chart here. This is what we stock in all of our local distribution centers. So like if you look at this, and I'll put it on the screen, if you look at translucent white and you look at glacier white, translucent white right here, you can see that line is passing behind it. The line you can see almost completely through the color. Transparent white is basically what it says, transparent, meaning that a lot of light will pass through it. If you look at glacier white up here, it's basically the same color as the translucent white, but you can't really see the line as well through it. So even though glacier white and translucent white are pretty much the same color white, you're going to have a much higher pigment load in the glacier white, which is going to help eliminate that shadow line on a dense color. The same as if you were to take satin black versus transparent black. They're both black, but satin black is going to be a lot more dense and have a heavier pigment load than the transparent black. So that is going to help stop shadow lines. Or if you're working with a more translucent black material, the transparent black is going to let light pass through more evenly. So I know a lot of people, when it comes to the glue, it's kind of the last thing they think about, right? You're picking the colors of the slab, you're picking the quartz, you've got the cool design, and then, oh, we just need to get some adhesive, get something that's the right color. But if you really want to take your game to that next level and truly deliver on the details, right? And it is the details that set apart the great fabricators from the average fabricators. And I think anybody watching this video, if you're trying to educate yourself, you're one of the fabricators that wants to move from good to great. You want to separate yourself from the pack. And the way you do that is to start thinking about these things, right? When you're picking an adhesive, not only are you thinking about the color, you're thinking about the opaqueness or the translucency of the material you're using versus the opaqueness and the translucency of the adhesive that you are selecting. So just something to keep in mind. I know if you guys are ever seeing those gray lines in your material after you pulled the seam, 90% of the time, you don't have enough pigment load in there, or you're using too opaque of an adhesive on too translucent of a material. You really want to try and balance those and get those even so that the light passes through everything at the same rate, or it doesn't pass through anything at all. So, like I say, if you guys have any questions or anything comes up, feel free to give us a call. We love helping you guys take your game to the next level, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event or when we're out visiting your guys' shops. Talk to you soon.